This paper found evidence of Trump derangement syndrome. Let's review the most interesting result and one thing that I think the paper gets wrong. The authors get some real news headlines and then they make up some fake news headlines. The headlines are either pro-Trump or anti-Trump. And then they get 1,100 people and figure out who among the people is pro-Trump and anti-Trump. The authors ask all the people to identify whether their collection of headlines are real or fake. What we're looking at here is the average rating for the news headlines from 1 to 5 on the y-axis, where 1 is not at all likely to be true and 5 is extremely likely to be true. On the x-axis, we have two groups, one group for the real headlines and another group for the fake headlines. The blue bar is the average estimated truth value for concordant headlines. Concordant meaning the headline agrees with the participant's belief. So an anti-Trump headline rated by an anti-Trump person would be concordant. A pro-Trump headline rated by an anti-Trump person would be discordant. First thing to notice in this graph is that both bars in the fake category are smaller than their counterparts in the real category. People are more likely to think fake news is fake than they are to think real news is fake. That's good. Second thing to notice, the blue bar in the fake category is bigger than the gray bar in the real category. That means people are more likely to think a fake story that agrees with them is real than they are to think that a real story that disagrees with them is real. That's bad. Quote, our research found the impact of headline political concordance, i.e. partisan bias, to be 1.4 to 2.2 times greater than that of headline truth, end quote. And a little later, quote, surprisingly, neither education level nor the tendency to engage in analytical reasoning predicted a reduction in concordance over truth bias. Instead, lower levels of objectivity illusion, less consumption of one-sided media, and less extreme views about Trump emerged as significant factors, end quote. Let's unpack that second quote. The concordance over truth bias is the extent to which you're more likely to believe things that agree with you. The strongest relationship with concordance over truth is having extreme views about Trump. These are positive or negative views on Trump. Just having extreme views about Trump is associated with being worse at predicting which headlines are true or false. It's like Trump is deranging people in some kind of syndrome. See, I'm satisfying the hook from the beginning of the video. I think that is the most interesting part of the video, that the extreme views about Trump is so related to being able to identify true or false headlines. But there are some things I think the paper gets wrong. First, the authors say that tendency to engage in analytical reasoning doesn't reduce the concordance over truth bias, but I have a hard time believing that because analytical reasoning should help you figure out which news headlines are true or false. So if you're more likely to engage in analytical reasoning, you actually should be better at figuring that out. The measure they use is the cognitive reflection test. It's basically a set of trick questions. If you don't stop and think, you're likely to get some of the questions wrong. For example, a farmer has 15 sheep and all but 8 of them die. How many sheep are left? If you jump to conclusions, you might just take 8 from 15 and say that there are 7 sheep left. But if you think for a second, you'll remember that the question tells you that there are 8 sheep left. So why do the authors think that this cognitive reflection test is a meaningful measure of tendency to engage in analytical reasoning? Quote, our measure of cognitive reflection exhibited acceptable predictive validity. It significantly predicted the accurate discernment of truth between real and fake political headlines. In the validation set, R equals 0.07, end quote. I'm sorry, does that say R equals 0.07 with a confidence interval that includes 0 and a p-value just barely below 0.05? What the authors are saying is it's reasonable to use this cognitive reflection test because scores on the test are related to whether or not people can distinguish fake headlines from real headlines. Like the cognitive reflection test is a measure of analytical reasoning, but the numbers they're citing are very unconvincing. This graph shows X related to Y with an R of 0.07. And my point for showing this graph is to illustrate that this is a very weak relationship. And the relatively high p-values cited in the paper makes me suspicious to say the least. My complaint here is that their cognitive reflection test seems pretty meaningless. It's actually not that related to ability to discern true from false headlines. So there's no reason to think that this test is measuring anything like the tendency to engage in analytical reasoning. The tiny scintilla of evidence the authors do offer is the opposite of persuasive. I think that this paper does give us an interesting insight into how we think about the news and the extent to which our partisan bias might make us more skeptical of opposing views and more credulous of claims that we like. But I don't accept the claims of this paper that the tendency to engage in analytical reasoning is irrelevant to this concordance over truth bias. I don't think they showed that. I don't think the test they used to measure a tendency to engage in analytical reasoning is very good or very meaningful. Thanks for your time.